From a Friar's Cell, Part 2. 2. The Witness of the New Testament. 6. Having explained the meaning of the Lateran decision, we may now presume to analyze the New Testament basis of the doctrine. A. We shall not deal with the old proofs that may be adduced from the Old Testament, if it is true, as it seems to be true, that the doctrine of the resurrection of the body, like the doctrine of the Trinity or the Incarnation, is foreshadowed and foretold rather than revealed in the Old Testament. We may be content to refer to these foreshadowings, which were differently interpreted by such loyal groups of Jewish thinkers as the Sadducees and the Pharisees. The book of Job has summed up these dim shadows in its poignant hope. I know that my Redeemer liveth, and in the last day I shall rise out of the earth, and I shall be clothed again with my skin, and in my flesh I shall see my God. Job 19, verse 25-26. If we hold that the doctrine of the resurrection of the body is revealed in the New Testament, that is, if we hold that Jesus Christ clearly revealed the resurrection of the body, we must look for this revelation primarily in the Gospels. But in the manner as elsewhere, the Gospel texts must not be dealt with merely mechanically, and, as it were, by a show of hands. This is a valid as well as a valuable way of investigating an alleged doctrine. But the New Testament, and especially the four Gospels, are too organic to be fully expressed by a mere mechanical interpretation. If history is but a mode of psychology, no sufficient valuation of its contents can be other than psychological. To interpret the four Gospels needs a certain knowledge of the four Gospelers. C. Let us begin in the interpretation of the four Gospels by the principles that the revelation granted to mankind by Jesus Christ was primarily Jesus Christ. The Word was himself through revealed Word. He was the light that needed no further light to make him manifest. He was the ultimate truth, who could be identified and recognized rather than proved. The essential revelation of Jesus Christ was something that he was and did rather than something he had said. D. We may go a step further and say that Jesus Christ's essential revelation of the resurrection of the body was the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It was not so much any previous or subsequent word he had spoken about. St. Thomas completes this thought by the profound principle that the resurrection of Jesus Christ is the efficient and exemplar cause of our resurrection. E. With these principles in mind, let us deal with the witness of St. Mark's Gospel. In other words, with the witness of St. Peter. 7. There is a detailed account of the resurrection of the identical body of Jesus Christ on Easter Sunday. The fact that the resurrection is supplemented by the mode, and after that he appeared in another shape, that is, his body could now change its shape. The account of St. Mark gives of the resurrection is so succinct as to be chosen by the liturgy of the Gospel of Easter Sunday. The additional traces of the resurrection are significant. A. There is a saying of Herod, recorded by the first three synopses. John the Baptist is risen again from the dead. B. There is our blessed Lord's prophecy of the resurrection. This was made after the Transfiguration and is recorded by St. Mark and St. Matthew alone. C. There is the answer to the Sadducees, who said there was no resurrection. To them our blessed Lord replied, Do not ye therefore err, because you know not the Scriptures or the power of God. For when they shall rise again from the dead, they shall neither marry or be married, but are as angels of God. This scene is common to the three synoptists. D. A further element in our blessed Lord's revelation of the resurrection is the miracle of raising from the dead. St. Mark, St. Matthew, and St. Luke all record the raising of the child, the daughter of James. All record that the death had touched her so lightly that Jesus called it sleep. We may synthesize this sufficient doctrine of St. Mark's Gospel. We are given the essential revelation of the fact and mode of the resurrection of our blessed Lord's body, together with a preliminary prophecy of it, and the common Jewish doctrine together with a defense of this against a casual interpretation, and all this confirmed by the miracle of raising a child from the dead. 8. St. Matthew has all that St. Mark has, together with some characteristic matter of his own. Alone he gives us our blessed Lord's commission to the apostles, raise the dead. With St. Luke he gives the message to St. John the Baptist, the dead rise again. C. Alone he gives our blessed Lord's words to the high priest, Hereafter you shall see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of the power of God. 9. St. Luke, the physician, could not fail to be interested in the ultimates of human life. It is characteristic of him that he has given us the fullest identifications of Jesus' birth and resurrection to life. A. It is therefore to be expected that this medical man has given us something like the fullness of a medical diagnosis in describing the identification and signs of Christ's risen body. The last chapter, 24, of his Gospel is a minute study not only of the fact and mode of Jesus Christ's risen life, but of the various signs of this life which Jesus Christ gave his apostles. We must especially notice the scene where Jesus says, See my hands and feet, that it is I myself. Handle and see. For a spirit hath not flesh and bones. Handle and see. For a spirit hath not flesh and bones, as you see me to have again. They offered him a piece of broiled fish and a honeycomb, and when he had eaten, B. A slender addition to the resurrection doctrine, peculiar to St. Luke, is in the parable of the Dives and Lazarus. Here he said to them, If they hear not Moses and the prophets, neither will they believe if one rise again from the dead. St. Luke is unique in recording two confirmatory miracles. He gives the raising of the daughter of Jairus from a death so recent as to resemble sleep, but he further gives the raising of the son of the widow of Naim from death so undeniable that already the body was on its way to the tomb. 10. St. John's characteristic resolve to complete rather than to repeat the synopsis has led him to give us valuable supplements to the resurrection of the dead. A. The resurrection of our blessed Lord in fact and mode is described by St. John with extraordinary detail. One might almost see in it the cherished memories of an old man standing on the brink of the tomb. Alone, St. John had recorded the piercing of the side of our blessed Lord, John 19:34, on the cross, and not without purpose. Where Luke records that the risen Savior is invited the disciples to see his hands and his feet, St. John records that he showed them his hands and his side. The disciples, therefore, were glad when they saw the Lord, John 20:20. But sight was to be confirmed by touch, in order that identification might be complete. Then he said to Thomas, "Put in thy finger hither, and see my hands, and bring hither thy hand, and put it into my side." B. St. Mark and St. Matthew substantially agree in giving the testimony of the false witnesses before Caiaphas, the high priest. These witnesses accused our blessed Lord of having said that he would destroy this temple made with hands, and within 3 days I will build another not made with hands. But St. Mark added, their witnesses did not agree. In this disagreement of the witnesses, it might have been doubted whether the so-called prophecy was not a mere invention of the false witness. St. John, with his constant desire to support the value of St. Mark's Gospel, assures us that the prophecy was not a perjury or false witness, but a prophecy of the resurrection of Jesus Christ's body. He spoke of the temple of his body. When, therefore, he was risen again from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this. John 2:21-22. C. St. John, who has not recorded our blessed Lord's apologetic references to the resurrection against the false views of the Sadducees, has been careful to record his direct references. The 5th chapter, with its cure of the man at the pool of Bethsaida and its heated discussion, might be looked upon as a sermon to Jerusalem on the resurrection of the body. The whole chapter should be read, for as the Father raiseth up the dead and giveth life, so the Son also giveth life to whom he will. Amen, amen. I say unto you that the hour cometh, and now is when the dead shall hear the voice of the Son of God, and they that hear shall live. The hour cometh wherein all that are in the graves shall hear the voice of the Son of God. And they that have done good things shall come forth unto the resurrection of life, and they that have done evil unto the resurrection of judgment. These 2 chapters are a unique contribution to the doctrine of the resurrection. D. Moreover, St. John has made us all his debtors by recording that our blessed Lord connected the raising and glorification of our dead bodies with his condescension and humiliation in the Blessed Sacrament. The 6th chapter of St. John's Gospel might almost be called a second sermon on the resurrection of the body, preached not to Jerusalem and Judea, but to Capernaum and Galilee. Again, this chapter, as the preceding chapter, should be studied in full, especially now this is the will of the Father who sent me, that of all that he has given me I should raise it up again in the last day. I will raise him up in the last day. I will raise him upon the last day. If any man eat of this bread, he shall live forever. He that eateth my flesh and drinketh my blood hath everlasting life, and I will raise him up on the last day. Our blessed Lord was here pointed out the mystic connection between his own body, which will last to eternity. 1. The resurrection of the body unto life everlasting will depend on the reception of the sacramental body of Jesus' church. In other words, the Holy Eucharist is supremely the sacrament of the living. 2. The difficulties which the human mind sees in the resurrection of the identical body from the ashes of death are paralleled and indeed outdone by the difficulties of the body of Jesus Christ in its sacramental existence. It would seem that if reason can accept the dogma of the body of Jesus Christ existing with all its accidents under the accidents of bread, there is no great mental hardship in accepting the resurrection of our identical body. Like the synopsis, St. John records a confirmatory miracle, the raising of Lazarus. John 11. It was well chosen for its purpose of confirmation. The miracle of giving back life to a dead body was not wrought on one so recently dead that death seemed but sleep, nor yet one who, dead a few hours, was on his way to the grave, but one whose body, after 3 days' burial under a tropical sun, was already undeniably corrupt. It is this stench of Lazarus' tomb that smells sweet and blossoms in the dust, reminding us that though corruption of the flesh has taken away from our body something that once belonged to it, God will undo this corruption and give back the body that was once ours. Thus, St. John has reminded us that one of the greatest of his Master's miracles was a victory over that corruption, which seems to make the resurrection of the identical body impossible. 2. This manifold witness of the Gospels to the resurrection of the body prepares us to see how largely the preaching of the resurrection of Jesus Christ entered unto the apologetics of the early apostles. A. St. Peter's first defense of the church before the people boldly said, Acts 3:15, But the author of life you killed, whom God raised from the dead, of which we are witnesses. Other explicit references not to the resurrection of Jesus Christ, but to the general resurrection of the dead, are to be found in Romans 8:23, Corinthians 4:16, showing that at the time when the apostle. Other explicit references, not to the resurrection of Jesus Christ, but to the general resurrection of the dead, are to be found in Romans 8:23. Corinthians 4:16 show that at the time when the apostle wrote this second group of epistles, the thought of the resurrection was habitual with him. Already in Thessalonians 4:16, he had tried to comfort the Greek mind of the Macedonians with the example of Christ's risen body. Later on, the same conviction of Christ's resurrection being the cause and exemplar of our resurrection found its expression in the last group of epistles written from his prison in Rome, where he was awaiting trial and perhaps death. It is this circumstance which gives a peculiar power to the texts. Already the writer of the epistle could write of the doctrine of baptisms and impositions of hands and on the resurrection of the dead and of eternal judgment In this final fragment of the New Testament, the doctrine had received formulation, which was to pass bodily into the Catholic Creed. Chapter 4. The Resurrection of the Body. The Witness of Reason. We have said that the resurrection of the body, being a revealed mystery, is not provable by reason, but is acceptable only on authority. As a preface to The Witness of Reason, we set down the principle of St. Thomas. Whoever tries to prove a mystery of faith by natural reason derogates from the faith in two ways. First, as regards the dignity of faith itself, which it consists in it being concerned with invisible things that exceed human reason, wheretofore the Apostle says that faith is of things that appear not. Secondly, as regards to the utility of drawing others to the faith, when anyone in this endeavor to prove the faith brings forward reasons which are not cogent, he falls under the ridicule of unbelievers, since they suppose that we stand upon such reasons, and that we believe on such grounds. Therefore we must not attempt or prove what is of faith except by authority alone. To those who receive that authority, while as regards others it suffices to prove that what faith teaches is not impossible. Since faith rests upon the infallible truth, and since the contrary of faith can never be demonstrated, it is clear that the arguments against faith cannot be demonstrations, but are difficulties that can be answered. With these words of wisdom, which should not be forgotten, in other words, the revelation of Scripture is helped out by what our reason tells us of the omnipotent power of God. Here, more explicitly than elsewhere, St. Thomas will be our guide. A. The first principle of reason is that the soul, as an intellectual and therefore simple substance, is naturally incorruptible and immortal. B. The second principle of reason is that the soul is not man. Even in the common speech of the people, that quarry of sound thinking, man is not said to be a soul, but to have a soul. C. The third principle of reason is that as man was not a soul, man is a soul and body. In other words, the body belongs essentially and not accidentally to the personality of man. It is almost incredible how common sense is a certain mild form of Manichaeism, which seems to deprecate the human body almost the sole source of sin, instead of being but a joint source and perhaps the lesser source in union with the soul. It must have been forgetfulness of the essential goodness of the body and of its essential union with the soul that dictated such words as the following. As long as we suppose the mystery of death to be the division of soul and body, so long as we must cling with a deep love to those remains, which yet we are forced to regard with a kind of loathing, we shall be ready to believe stories of miracles wrought by them. We shall be half inclined to worship them. Or if we reject this temptation, because Romanists have fallen into it, we shall take our own Protestant way of asserting the sanctity of relics by maintaining that a certain day they will be gathered together, and that the very body to which they once belonged will be constructed out of them. If we did attach any meaning to the expression upon which St. Peter at Jerusalem, St. Paul at Antioch, dwelt so earnestly that Christ's body saw no corruption. We should not dare, I think, any longer to make the corrupt, degrading, shameful accidents which necessarily belong to that body in each of us, because we have sinned the rule by which we judge of it here. How much less should we suppose these to be the elements out of which its high and restored and spiritual estate can ever be fashioned? 1. It is difficult to find the exact meaning behind these words. The phrase, corrupt, degrading, shameful accidents, which necessarily belong to that body, etc., seems to suggest that sin has changed the substance of the body, or that the body is the creation of a Manichaean principle of evil. 2. It is evident that if from these corrupt, degrading, shameful accidents there can be no fashioning of a spiritual estate for the body, still less can there be such a fashioning for the soul. It is clear that the qualifications corrupt, degrading, shameful, which are largely metaphorical when applied to the dying or dead body, are literal when applied to the dead soul. It is therefore evident that the incorrect doctrine of the death and resurrection of the body will lead to the denial of the spiritual resurrection and death of the soul. 3. It is astonishing that men like Maurice are found to belittle the human body as if it was no part, or no essential part, of our being, when it is a question of the resurrection. But in other matters, as for example in the matter of asceticism, they are found to exalt the human body as if it were a great and even a noble part of our being. Indeed, how otherwise could they retain a high opinion of human beings whose activities and pleasures are for the most part concerned with the body? How, too, could it be said, as if it had been said by some, that the bodily procreative act is man's highest act? From these exaggerations and consequent contradictions, we are spared by the Catholic doctrine that the body is essentially good and is essentially joined to the soul as part of the human personality. St. Thomas has summed up the value of this in these words: if the resurrection of the body is scorned, it is not easy, nay, it is hard, to hold the immortality of the soul, for it is evident that the soul is joined to the body naturally, since to be separated from it is against nature and is accidental. Hence the soul separated from the body is imperfect, as long as it is without the body. But it is impossible that what is natural and essential, per se, should be finite and, as it were, nothing, whereas what is natural and accidental should be infinite. This would be the case if the souls were to endure without the body. Hence the Neoplatonists, who admitted immortality, supposed reincarnation. But this is heretical. Hence, if the dead do not rise again, our only hope would be in this life. D. The fourth principle of reason is the goodness not only of the body, but of matter. Those who, in order to deny the resurrection of the body, are obliged to deny the goodness of matter, must find themselves in opposition to modern science on two counts. First, the modern science is, by its own definition, is mostly, if not wholly, concerned with what it is perceives by the five senses. In other words, with matter. Now, unless matter is essentially good, then modern science is mostly evil. Secondly, if science is the knowledge of what comes to us through our bodily senses, and in the next world we will have not bodily senses because we have not a body, then the next world will have no science. E. Sometimes it is urged that the modern science, with its new views of matter, has made it impossible to believe the resurrection of the body. Sometimes it is urged that modern science, with its new views of matter, have made it impossible to believe the resurrection of the body. Mr. H.D.A. Major, in A Resurrection of Relics, quotes the following authorities. Bishop Goodwin of Carlisle. The view of the possibilities of the future resurrection is one which our present knowledge of matter and its laws render it imperative on all wise men to discard. Matter which appertains to one body at a time appertains to another body at another. The notion of particle being joined to particle so as to reform a certain body involving an impossibility. From The Foundations of the Creed, 2nd edition, page 384. It is the enunciation of a theory which a knowledge of the laws of matter show to be untenable. Canon C.H. Robinson. The belief was widespread in early times that the material bodies of Christians would one day be literally resuscitated and would rise from their graves in a form visible to material eyesight. Modern science, by showing that the particles of matter of which our present bodies are composed have previously formed parts of the bodies of other beings, has rendered such a belief impossible. The most unscholarly, not to say uncharitable, quotation made by Mr. Major is from the same Canon Robinson. In an age when physical science had hardly come to the birth, and when a man would have been excommunicated or put to death as a heretic, had he ventured to suggest that the particle of matter of which his body was composed, that might already have been formed part of other bodies of others who had lived and died before him. The only way by which a belief in the preservation of human dignity could be expressed in unambiguous terms was by the same use of the language which was adopted in the Creed. On this we may say 4 things. First, this view of the constant flux of matter in the human body is so old that in the 13th century it has been elaborated by St. Thomas in a manner that almost defies the untrained thought of our day. If excommunication and death awaited the daring thinker, who would have propounded the modern theory, then, through some miscarriage of justice, the angelic doctor died a natural death in full communion with the Holy See. It is almost incredible that a doctor of divinity should have made any such statement, and still more incredible that it should be quoted by one who holds an influential place at the University of Oxford. It will go far to discredit the modernist claim to scholarship, which we have hitherto admitted on the claim of the Dean of Carlisle. Secondly, if the physical theory that the body is a passing flux of material particles disproves the survival of the body, then a kindred theory would seem to disprove the survival of the soul. For it is caused by very subtle thinking, that what we call the soul is but a series of states of consciousness, indeed of states of present consciousness, which as such are not sufficient to guarantee us the certitude of their being in organic unity with past consciousness. If it be urged that although there is a succession of states of consciousness, yet there is an abiding unity, it may be urged in reply that mutatis mutandis, the same applies to the body. The patent empiric fact that is the persistent unity, the scientific deduction in the flux of elements. Thirdly, granted the fact, which personally I cannot call a verified fact, of the constant flux of particles in matter, it would seem that this does not disprove, but rather seems to prove the possibility of bodily resurrection. The alleged fact is that every particle in a body changes, and yet that the body remains the same. Now consider the opposite theory, that no particle ever changes in a body. If this theory were true, there would be no evidence that a body can remain the same with change of matter. But as death does not make a change of matter, the evidence for this theory would go to prove that a change of matter betokened a change of soul. In other words, that death makes it impossible that the same body should rise again. Fourthly, the modern recent theories of matter are almost overwhelmingly on the side of the resurrection of the body. A recent scientific writer in the Times summed up the present view of the nature of matter. On the physical side, the phenomena of light, electricity, and magnetism are all being explained in terms of the electron. On the chemical side, the properties and qualities of the arrangements of identical electrons are being explained in terms of the arrangements of identical electrons in different systems. There is, in fact, one unit of matter, the electron. And this unit of matter is himself immaterial. Modern science, by saying that the unit of matter is itself immaterial, can hardly be taken to deny the possibility of the resurrection of the body, unless it denies the immortality of mind, that is, of the soul. The fifth principle of reason is that the soul of the causa efficiens from the body of the moment of its union to the body, when the soul is reunited to such a part of its body, will allow us to call it the same body. We may well see an instantaneous recapitulation of the formative process. Cytology seems to tell us that the real living essential of all unit cell is almost infinitesimally small, yet that microcosm has within it to form the microcosm of the finished organism. If it is only the acceleration of motion we need for the full acceptance of the resurrection or reformation of the body in modes akin to the formation of the body, science has now given us that almost frictionless multiplying gear, which has no limit save the adhesive power of the gear metal, F. Perhaps in this hard matter of the bodily resurrection some hope of recalling men to unity may be found in the condition of the risen body. Theology lays it down that not the substance of the body, but only its condition, shall be changed. Body will not become spirit, but whilst remaining body, it will become pliant and obedient to the spirit. Time and space will still remain. Some of the soul's supremacy over time and space will be given by the soul as a dowry to the body. One last thought may end this defense of the immortality of man in terms of the resurrection of man's body. The Church, in thus seeming to cherish the lesser doctrine more than the greater, is keeping her own customary way. When once the doctrine of the divinity of the Son, and thus of Jesus Christ, was officially defined, The Church was almost more intent on safeguarding his humanity than his divinity. The Oriental disregard for human freedom and personality made little account of denying the human will, and therefore the human freedom of Christ. But the Church understood that the sacred humanity could not be kept with the denial of a human will and freedom, and that ultimately, through the divinity of Jesus Christ, did not rest on his humanity, man's belief in the divinity of Jesus Christ, and does. His humanity, man's belief in the divinity of Jesus Christ, did and does rest on the belief of his humanity. In a kindred way, the Church is certain that, whilst the immortality of the soul does not rest on the resurrection of the body, yet man's belief in one may be imperiled by his disbelief in the other. For this reason, the Church seems more concerned for the lesser than for the greater, for the sheath more than the sword, and for the husk than for the kernel. Yet it is not in any mistaken view that the scale of values, but in a consciousness that what is of less importance may be in greater danger of being overlooked, and that the whole orb of truth, which the Church is commissioned to teach, must find a place, not for what is most and best, but for what is all.